By now, you've learned how to think visually to create simple drawings. Let's take those learnings and tie them together to produce valuable content with sketches. This is a 5-step process. Step number 1, start with finding interesting sources. Step 2, capture what you think is interesting. Step 3, now you'll begin to think visually. Step 4, you can now begin to create sketches. Step 5, when you are done, share your work with others online. Although the process looks simple, the process of simplifying can be challenging. So make sure that you choose content that you are genuinely passionate about so that you have fun in the process, or else it won't be sustainable. And this is valuable for a number of reasons. Number 1, you're saving the audience time. Number 2, you're sharing your perspective. And 3, you're exercising your visual skills. All of this combined draws attention. Another way of looking at this process is through this funnel. At first, you'll start with a lot of information. From there, you'll begin to cut down, editing, simplifying. What will result are valuable sketches. Here's a less abstract way of looking at it. Something worth noting is that what's going to tie these individual sketches is a story. Instead of just throwing out random quotes, there will be a flow to things. And you've already learned how to tell stories, so you can implement those learnings in this process. Okay, let's begin. I came across a book called Ask Iwata. It's a book about Nintendo's late legendary CEO, Satoru Iwata. As I was reading and enjoying this book, I was highlighting the passages that stood out to me. I took my highlights and created a Notion document to record all of the ideas I thought were worth sharing. Next, I went through the material, highlighting in red any word that created an image in my mind. This would help me later on in the sketching process. For example, the word energy can be represented by a battery, a lightning bolt. The right place could be represented by a target. Exert could be an arm that's, flexing power. World could be a globe. You get the idea. So if the word can create an image in your mind, then highlight it and come back to it in the sketching phase. After highlighting words that brought pictures into my mind, I began to remove the parts of the passages that I wasn't going to use, and I did that by graying out the text. Then I began to think about the story. How would this visual thread flow? How could I tie in all of these different passages of wisdom and bring them together to form a story? I'm beginning to consider how this thread is going to close. So here I'm adding what I think is going to be the last tweet, the last part of the visual thread. At the top, you can see there's an introduction. So I'm beginning to form loosely the story that's tying everything together. After we've done our visual thinking, sketching becomes so much easier, because we've already highlighted the words that bring pictures into our minds. By now, the story is mostly done. There are a few edits still left, but in this process, we are simply taking the passages and creating visuals for them. So for this visual thread, I wanted to start off the story in the location that Iwata was born. In this example, I didn't have the map of Japan memorized, so I found an image on the internet and loosely traced it. You can do this as well when you don't know how to draw something. Don't be afraid of using Google Images or any other search engine to find reference images for your sketches. What I'm thinking about here is, how can I create a visual that has the least amount of drawing as possible? The goal of this drawing is to just show where Iwata was born. I realized that instead of drawing the ocean surrounding the island of Japan, I could just write the title Japan and people would know where the story is taking place. There's a lovely passage in the book where Iwata describes his childhood and his insatiable curiosity. Notice how I've highlighted here kid, encyclopedia, cover to cover. Those were the words that guided the process as I began to visualize a sketch for this part of the story. So in this process, I began to think about Iwata as a kid, and I imagined the child sort of looking towards the horizon, standing on top of a book, and the encyclopedias leading him into a new world. If you're repeating drawings, you can duplicate them to save yourself some time. And here I'm just adding color for visual interest so that I can direct the viewer's eye towards the child where I want them to focus on. I'm using the words that I previously highlighted to guide myself through this process. And throughout the visual thread, throughout the story, I do this again and again. I'm using the visual words that I've already highlighted to create constraints for myself as I am thinking of visuals to amplify the message. In the case of Iwata having so many questions and becoming a programmer, I began to imagine a question mark inside of his mind. And here I'm just beginning to simplify, going from a really complex drawing to a more simpler outline, more simple drawing. Iwata has a really great quote where he says that if you take energy and you direct it into the right place, you can have a great effect on the world. I started to think about batteries to represent energy and maybe a arrow pointing towards a target as the right place, and then adding a symbol like a flash, a lightning bolt. Although that was a good idea, I decided to keep pushing and ultimately landed on this concept where it's someone pushing dominoes, having sort of an effect, a domino effect on the world. And I'm using the earth as a sort of a metaphor for the world. And I thought this visual did a much better job. I continue to repeat this process with all of the drawings for this visual thread, just using simple shapes and simple lines to describe and amplify the message in the text. It's important to pay attention to the copy that you're writing and the visual. You want to make sure that they complement each other. So here, the sketch that I'm making is for Iwata's quote where he says that he trusts the process like someone who's been lifting weights all day. I think that this visual amplifies that message and sort of drives that point home. And you just want to keep repeating this using the visual words that you've highlighted and just thinking about what visual can help that text just be a lot stronger, and also attract the viewer's eye. Here I'm just creating a token, almost like a video game reward for feedback, and I used a diamond to represent what the value that genius has, because I thought diamonds are inside the earth and are hard to obtain. So in this part, Iwata talks about shocking people in a good way in order to create new customers. And I thought about implementing sort of comic word styling and a little hand clicking on the buy button and just really simple visuals to drive home. And I'm experimenting with vignettes here, but ultimately I decided that an arrow would do the job a lot better. So if you notice, It's all about trying out things and figuring out what works and what doesn't work and what's the simplest way to create a visual that really makes sense and is clear and doesn't make the viewer have to think too much. This is what makes the work so valuable for the viewer because the visuals are doing the heavy lifting. So when the viewer is able to see it, they immediately understand it. So you followed the process and now you have these beautiful sketches and this great story. Now it's time to share with the world. If sharing your sketches is something new, this can be quite intimidating. So I encourage you to invite someone you trust, a friend, a family member, and have them sit next to you as you begin to put together your visual thread or publish your work. It will give you courage to have someone there as you begin this journey of sharing your sketches online. Over time, it'll become much easier and you'll be able to just rely on yourself to publish. This part of the process is very important because this is where you receive feedback. This is where you learn more about what's working and what is not working. And this is a great way to draw in more opportunity. Over time, your process will become quicker and more refined. When you have these visual assets, you can now bring them together and create videos, stories for Instagram, videos for YouTube. You can use them in so many different ways, presentations. You now have the process for creating valuable content from any interesting source. Enjoy yourself and remember to trust the process.